Rena, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. For those that don't know, I met Rena when I was leading Equinox Explorer retreat in Costa Rica. She was one of the guests there. We just kind of hit it off. And I've always thought of you as someone to have on the podcast ever since I said that I was going to do it, because I find your work absolutely fascinating. And I know nothing about the intricacies. And I'm really excited to dive in on it.
Oh, well, I'm so glad that you reached out and we've reconnected. That trip, we were talking a little before we started recording when that was, and it's crazy. It was like right before the pandemic, and it seems like so much has happened. We were so carefree surfing in Costa Rica, and then bam, we've gone through the last few years, and then here we are again, reconnected.
I know. And I think if one thing happened for sure, it's that the pandemic has made the virtual space a much more acceptable medium for conversation and connecting, because as you do with your business and I do with mine, this is kind of how you run it now, right?
Yeah, no, I love it. I feel like if we didn't have this platform, who knows, maybe we would have chatted, maybe not, but this is
Right.
allowing us to come back together and catch up.
And so I want to just really dive in on this stuff. One of the main reasons that I wanted to talk to you is because I've had several clients go through pregnancies, and through these pregnancies and training women through their trimesters was really like my first exposure as an adult to pregnancy, because I don't yet have children and I just hadn't been exposed to it. It wasn't something that I necessarily sat down and talked with my mom about or my dad about. And up until later in my life, I just figured you spend so much time when you're a teenager trying not to have babies that I just never really thought that that is something that people struggle with, or that has complications or challenges, et cetera. Why can't we have children?
Good question. And I love that you're taking a deep dive into this and really thinking about it, especially as a male. So often I get females, but it's very, very few and far between that I have a male come up to me and ask this. So I love that you're so mindfully thinking about it. So why can't we have children? Broad question. Not an easy answer. I mean, there are so many reasons. Infertility is a disease. It's classified as a disease by the World Health Organization. It's 1 in 8 couples go through infertility. It could be anything from endometriosis to polycystic ovarian syndrome. Your uterus might be an abnormal shape, blockages in tubes. I mean, the reasons for not being able to conceive are huge, and that's just sort of what women may face. With men, certainly things might come up with sperm. So there's all sorts of reasons. Environment, age that we're now trying to conceive is later than before. So I don't know that there's one black and white answer. But what I will say is that it's so important to be your own advocate. And even if you're not thinking about having children, take the steps to just go get a consult to see if there's any red flags, so that you don't end up in my office and then it's too late. Maybe you've waited quite a long time. Now you have diminished ovarian reserve and you're not able to have a biological child. And you could have taken the steps before to preserve your fertility, or at least known, okay, here's some red flags. I may have issues. This is sort of, what I should be thinking about with timeline, or maybe some interventions.
So when you're talking about timelines and interventions, and people basically looking at this as preventative medicine for pregnancy to hedge your bets so that you can have, like you said, a biological child, the first thing that comes to mind for me is birth control. I've grown up in a generation where everyone was getting on birth control right away, as quick as they could, partly preventatively, but I think from a responsibility standpoint, it just limited your risk as well. Granted, birth control only, there's not male birth control, so only females are taking it. And then we get to a place where, at least I know, as as women get closer to having kids or coming off birth control, there's other hormonal issues and reasons for wanting to get off birth control, effects to the body. What kind of like prolonged damage does something like birth control have on our ability to reproduce? Because you're shutting down an essential biological process, right?
So that's another kind of hot button topic. Birth control, they're synthetic hormones, right? So you're putting hormones in your body that your body may not be producing, but it's regulating you. So when you're on birth control, when you ovulate each month, it's a synthetic cycle. So you're still ovulating, but it's not something that can be fertilized, right?
Right.
There's certainly I mean, I'm definitely a big believer in birth control, for sure. But again, that's a hot button topic, and you get people with really differing perspectives on that. I'm someone who believes in both Eastern and Western medicine. And I also have PCOS myself, polycystic ovarian syndrome, which can be super controversial about birth control.
Controversial in that if you have that, you shouldn't take it, or vice versa.
Depends who you ask. So some people say yes, some people say no. I do, because I believe it regulates my hormones. My body's not doing that, and I need the addition of those hormones to be regulated. I think there's so many different types of birth control out there now. There's certainly some on the market, many on the market now that are super, super low dose hormones. That's one of the ones that I take. So we have a lot more options than we did a few years ago. And I think also for many people who may struggle with mental health, maybe PMDD, or this really the ebb and flow of their hormones, birth control can also be helpful to help regulate you as well. So not only can birth control be good for pregnancy prevention, but also for mental health, if you're someone who struggles with a real imbalance in hormones.
But is it affecting, and again, like all these questions really come from a place of like, I just don't know. So forgive me if I'm ignorant in them, but isn't then asking your body to like regulate on its own, release these hormones on its own in absence of birth control, create a challenge for the biological process to occur?
Well, sometimes we need help. I mean, look at an SSRI, for example, an antidepressant. So if you have a chemical imbalance in your brain, sometimes as much as we want to regulate that ourselves, most people, if given the choice, don't want to feel depressed. Sometimes we need help. We need a pill to help balance those SSRIs so we can get back to a baseline. So, similar for birth control, sometimes our bodies just don't perform how we want or need them to do. And so we need the assist.
And are there factors when you assess like infertility, for example, are there known factors that contribute to this directly that can be avoided, or is this, I guess, like what is contributing to this the most in our society currently, like right now?
To infertility?
Yeah.
So again, there's so many different things, right? Again, age, the fact that we're now, especially in metropolitan areas, a lot of people are trying to conceive later. So like 30s, early 30s, mid 30s, late 30s, or even beyond. A lot of people, especially women, are more career focused and they're just not ready in their 20s. So age is certainly a factor. Environment might be, soy, BPA, toxins, all of that stuff. I'm sure you've heard of people trying to get away from using plastic or even organic clothes, because there's some studies that show that the chemicals used to treat clothing may be seeping into skin and having an effect on women's eggs. So all sorts of stuff like that. So I think it is really important to try and lead a healthy lifestyle as much as possible. Be conscious about eating organic, look at what you're putting on your body, your skincare, all of that stuff, because that may have an impact. But again, at base level, infertility is a disease. So that's sort of like asking, well, why are people getting cancer? We can come up with with certain reasons and certain factors and look at risk levels, like, okay, if you're a smoker, more likely to get lung cancer. But infertility, again, there's so many factors that go into it. And some of it is just, it's our bodies and biology.
When you deal with, so you are now in like private practice, right? Essentially, like you see personal clients on like a one-on-one and help them through this process, right?
I do. And then I'm also the director of social work services for a large infertility Reproductive Medicine Associates, RMA of New York.
And so when you see people there, what are like, where are they coming to you at what stage through their process, I'll call it?
Usually when they're feeling really victimized and really, really upset. The best place for them to come to me, I always say, I prefer you come to me when you think you don't have anything to talk about, so then we can keep you at base level. Unfortunately, most people come to me when they're feeling, really down and out. They're feeling hopeless. They're feeling beaten down. They're feeling like they'll never achieve their goal, guilt, shame, loss of control, uncertainty, tensions in partnerships or family, friends, all of that stuff has arisen, and they no longer are able to cope with it on their own. And they realize they really need some professional guidance to help them cope with this.
And so a lot of it is, so it's actually physically dealing with coming to terms with the fact that you won't have a biological child, or that they've attempted already and now it's time to explore other options.
So it depends on the case. I mean, I would say, so some of my cases, sure, people that are dealing with, okay, maybe they need to go an egg donor, sperm donor route, or surrogacy adoption, or be child free, as the term is. But the majority of my cases are just people who are going through treatment, whether that's an IUI, which is sort of usually the starting point for fertility treatment, or IVF, or maybe they're just doing blood work. Egg freezing, also fertility preservation. The stress levels of infertility are the same as cancer and heart disease. So they're really, really, really high. And there's a lot of loss that goes into it, a lot of grief. It's sort of grieving this image or picture you had for yourself. Most people don't picture conceiving in a doctor's office or a clinic.
Right.
So
Yeah.
there's a lot of loss that goes with it.
It's crazy to think about. Again, I go back to just being like a kid growing up and thinking about people that are parents and having children. And it's such like not to dumb it down to like the stork delivering the baby on your doorstep kind of example, but it's somewhat of like a fairy tale thing, getting pregnant and having a kid, and then to grow up and realize that it's actually quite the opposite for a lot of people, and that there's quite a bit of pain associated with this. And that's not even taking into account that it is really expensive to go through things like IVF. And so for a large group of the population, the same options aren't even available.
Sure.
I can't imagine the stress of what it's like to go through. I mean, you mentioned it akin to like cancer or heart disease. I totally get that. I don't, something that you've just expected would be no problem your whole life, to then find out the most meaningful moment to you is then not. It's amazing that you're able to help people through that process. It just seems like a huge undertaking.
Well, I think as you touched upon, yeah, cost being a barrier to care is definitely one of the worst things, and it's really, really heartbreaking when people can't pursue treatment because they can't afford it. And of course, there's a lot to unpack there. On a macro level, advocacy is something that I'm really involved in and working towards, because I really believe strongly cost should never be a barrier to care, someone family building.
Right. Let's unpack that. I mean, how do you, what's the current state, first of all, because I don't know. And then what's the path towards that state improving on a national or global scale?
So we're working on it. We're working on it every day. recently New York passed the what's called the FAFTA law, Fair Access to Fertility Treatment Act, which improved coverage for New Yorkers, which was huge. There's still a lot of loopholes in it. So you still find people without coverage. And, you know, Resolve is the National Infertility Organization, and they're super involved with advocacy and working every day to improve coverage and really push for each state to pass laws that cover treatment.
What led you to this line of work?
So I went through fertility treatment myself to have my daughter, who is almost 5. And so it was about 7 years ago I started, because it took me about 2 years to conceive. I was not in this niche at the time, but I started going through treatment and just totally lost myself, you know. So I spent the first year super isolated, depressed, and really like a shell of myself. And after a year, I was sort of like, what am I doing? I'm trying to create a life, and I'm no longer living one at all. I had a ton of anger and resentment towards family and friends and just the world. You know, I felt like no one was really supporting me. That's when I got myself really involved with Resolve, because I was going through everything with no insurance coverage, so paying everything out of pocket. And I started advocating and connecting with other people in the space. For me, that made the huge difference. And I started to be open about what I was going through. And then I found people really kind of came out of the woodwork to share their own stories. Then after I had my daughter, I wanted to specifically work in this space and provide counseling to people going through this, because I felt no one should ever feel like I did. So I blindly emailed info at all the big fertility clinics in New York City. And then, you know, sort of the universe and right time, right place, RMA, where I work now, they took me on part-time at first. I pitched the role to them, and then very quickly it grew to full-time. And now, you know, we're really trying to create this department there and really make mental health a priority. So I'm so grateful to them, because they believed in what I had to say, and they took me on. And it's been almost 5 years there now.
So you said it was 2 years that you were going through this prior to having your daughter, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah,
what?
so I went through like a lot of IUIs, and then I started doing IVF. I had a chemical pregnancy, so we had a loss. I had transfers that didn't work. And then finally, back then, they didn't believe as much in genetic testing at the clinic that I was at. And so they were transferring these embryos that weren't working. And so finally I said, you need to genetic test these embryos. I can't do this anymore. So they unfroze them, genetic tested them, eliminated some embryos, and the next transfer was my daughter. And so I just know in my gut, like if I hadn't done that, they would have just kept transferring these embryos. And I really was at the end of this. I could not keep doing this anymore.
I can't imagine what I will never understand what it is like to go through that. And my only experience, even in the ballpark, is witnessing people that I know personally go through IVF. And even from a place of, you know, finance not being like a limiting factor, being able to go through the process at will, the pain of doing it, the shots, the consistency, the letdown, the repeated failures that happen or happened over the course of some of these ventures through it. How do you like pick yourself up in those situations? I mean, you said you're angry, you're feeling alone. There's resentment built towards people in your personal circle. So it sounds almost like you're going about this like by yourself.
So I mean, I felt like I was. I mean, I definitely had a victim mentality. I've done a lot of work on myself since then, and I'm in a totally different place. That experience, I think, was the catalyst for me going and doing this work on myself and starting on this journey of really finding my strength and resilience. But I didn't go through the experience with grace and dignity. I totally isolated myself. I was angry. I lashed out, and the whole thing is, for lack of a better word, it can just be a total mind fuck. You're
Yeah.
doing everything they tell you to do and it's not working, and you feel so out of control, and like your life is on hold. You can't travel because you always have to go to the clinic. Your exercise is restricted because if you're on the medications, it's not safe to do it. So it's feeling like so uncomfortable in yourself. And sometimes I think, when I have a conversation like this with someone, like, easy for me to sit here now and counsel people. What if I went through this again? How would I handle it now? How would I handle it? I'm a very different person now than I was back then, but what would I do? Would I handle it with grace and dignity? Would I be able to rise above and be mindful and find the gratitude and all the stuff that I talk about all day? Or would I just totally retract back to my formal self? I don't know.
It's interesting to do those thought experiments with yourself about things. I think about this a lot because, a lot of like coaching, you're dealing with like accomplishment and motivation and self-worth and the feelings that people have once they complete things that they've been after. And it's very easy to get kind of high and mighty on your like optimism, when in reality, sometimes things are just so traumatic that they pull you back down into that place of fear, anxiety, other things are associated with depression, angst, animosity. What would you tell someone who's going through that right now, who's in the thick of that toughness, that doesn't have a support system, doesn't have people that they can reach out to, and then also doesn't have the experience that you had to be on the flip side of it?
I always tell people that it takes a village, and it's really important to let other people hold space for this. Being vulnerable and opening up about what you're going through is the hardest thing, because being vulnerable is hard. And as humans, we often struggle because then you're opening yourself up to possibly rejection. But I think it's so important to build your village, whether that's a support group, a great therapist, finding one or two people you can open up to. I think it's the hard things in life that shape us and have the ability to change us, and that's when real growth can occur. And when we're in it, it can certainly be very hard, if not impossible, to see the light. So when I was going through it, people would always say, oh, this is happening to you for a reason, and you might not know why now, but you will, which I didn't really find helpful because I was just in it. But I work from a strengths perspective, and I really always work to help people find their strength and find their resilience and power. So much of this is about a loss of control. So I work to help people feel in control and help them work to make this a piece of their life instead of the whole. So
Right.
that instead of this being so all consuming, how can we make this a piece of your life? And then you're still living the rest of your life.
I feel like that's a crucial part in getting people to navigate hardship, because I mean, your experience is a good one to reference. Like, you're now on the other side of it. You have a daughter that you're in love with who's 5 years old, and the experiences were real and you can think back to them, but they're no longer, right? You're beyond that. And that experience is now, it's like it's paragraphs in your book, it's not your entire experience. And it's easy to get bogged down in those, regardless of what you're going through, and become consumed by whatever thing you're in the middle of. And so if you can compartmentalize it a little bit and then bring your head up above water, then you're able to actually navigate it and get through to the other side, be that independently or by the use of community, which I always recommend. Having a support system is crucial in making these progresses.
Right. Yeah, supports, accountability, feeling like people actually care. It's so important. I think can make a big, big difference.
What was it like for you when you had your daughter. I mean, you finally, you get through this crazy period. You finally get the doctors to do what you say, right? And then bam, like what, what was that roller coaster like?
Uh, well, I want to sit here and tell you, it was amazing, everything happily ever after, all that stuff. But it was super tough. I got divorced very soon after. And that was certainly not in my initial plan, to be a single parent. And I was hustling, I was hustling to rebuild my life, and as a single mom, and put a career together. I was actually in grad school at the time, so I had no income, and it was really, really hard. It was, besides infertility, it was definitely probably the most difficult period of time for me. I had to really rebuild. And so I wish I could tell you it was a period of bliss and I loved being a new mom, but I didn't. I was in survival mode, just pure survival mode. How am I going to survive for myself and my daughter, navigate this divorce, and pick myself up? So it was quite difficult.
How did you navigate that?
Not cleanly or in a nice way, really. You just put one foot in front of the other and you just do it. It was a period of extreme chaos in my life. And that's when I started getting into triathlons, and then eventually Ironman, and now marathons, because it helped me have a goal and have something to work towards. It gave me a lot of strength and empowerment. But my daughter for me was the catalyst to start learning to love myself. I did not at all before. I had no self-love. Infertility definitely really triggered all of that, and these feelings of guilt and shame, and just feelings of self-worth. And then when my daughter was born, she at least gave me the reason, if I can't love myself for me, I need to do it for her. She's here and I need to raise her to be a strong woman, and I don't want her to go through what I went through. So she was a catalyst to pick myself up and just start this journey of learning how to love myself, put in the work, go to therapy, do the explorations, humble yourself, work through fear, work through ego, and really pick yourself up and rise.
I mean, Oscar won. Stuff like that. I mean, that's incredible. But this is why I love questions like this, because most of the time it's not the fairy tale ending. It's not the cookie cutter answer. Like that experience is very real, right? And like you said, it's those experiences shape who we are. I can only imagine a world where your experience helps the people that you help, right? If it was all peaches and cream, you wouldn't be a very realistic person to go to for help. But you can meet people now where they're at with real experience that you've been through, right? And help them get through this and then come out on the other side of it, and maybe even manage the expectations that this might not be exactly how you envision it, but together, you're going to get through this. Do you find yourself leaning on your experience when you are working with people individually?
I think people are often drawn to the fact that I went through fertility treatment, and I'm super open about that. And that comes up. I think it resonates with people because they feel like I'm not just another talking head, telling them it's going to be fine. Like, I get it. And so when people ask me questions about it, I talk about it. The other stuff, that doesn't really come up. I don't publicize that, or talk about, kind of the after. But I can say what does come up a lot is it's really hard being a new mom. And so many of my patients, especially people that go through infertility, think that, okay, I went through all of this, I was bargaining, I was reckoning, I was, promising the universe or higher power, like whatever spirit or God you believe in, like, if you give me this, I'll be perfect, I'll be the best mom, whatever. Being a new parent is really freaking hard. And it's not all fun, and it doesn't look like, the Instagram pictures. And So patients often struggle with that, right? Okay, now I have this baby, but I feel really guilty that I don't love it all the time. Um, and so often, when people stay with me, we segue into kind of that next chapter of allowing them, like, that's valid, and how to navigate new parenthood, and that it's okay to feel that way. I didn't love being a new parent. I mean, my situation was different probably than a lot of people's, but it was hard. I don't remember it with any sort of joy or happiness. I was, like I said, I was just surviving. So certainly, kind of this new mom phase, it's really, really difficult. And that's something a lot of people struggle with. Is it okay for me to not feel happy about this all the time if I worked for this, for years and years, and to get annoyed at my kid or get frustrated? Yes, of course.
I feel like it's important to bring those things up. I was just talking on another episode with someone about this exact thing. Like, we're not supposed to be happy 24/7.
No,
Feeling down is it's a normal human emotion. It's actually an essential human emotion. You need to be able to be afraid of shit, and you need to be able to be excited about stuff. And I can't imagine what it would be like to be in that situation and then have the child that you've been trying so hard to have. But it sounds like bringing to light the fact that there's going to be an array of emotions you feel in regards to that, and that's normal. I'm sure that takes a lot of stress off of these individuals that are going through that, because it's seemingly a contrast, right, to what they anticipated feeling like.
right. They think, a lot of people, when you're in sort of the middle of fertility treatment, you think, when I get that positive pregnancy test, my life is going to be fine. Okay, then that happens. And then usually comes anxiety with being pregnant. Okay, when I have the baby, I'm going to get my life back, happily ever after. Then it's really hard to be a new parent, And so something I work on besides, helping people navigate that is also, being present. And before I sort of started on this personal work for myself, I was very highly anxious, always future tripping, always catastrophizing, very paranoid, and I could not be present. And so my mindfulness practice, what I've done personally and what I teach people professionally, is how to be present. How can we just be with today? We don't know what tomorrow is going to bring, right? Look at the pandemic. Who predicted that? And so how can we just be present, and how can we be enough today?
We should have done these episodes joint, because we're mirroring a lot of the same themes. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think that mindfulness it's something I try to work on even in training and coaching, is getting people to be okay with just what's going on right now in front of you. And for me, mindfulness has been a long process. I think I used to be hyper analytical and overanalyze everything. And it was through meditation that allowed myself these little breaks where I would know that where I was or what I was doing. It's that little moment where you're walking the dog and you look down and you see the dog there in front of you. Like, that sounds trivial and dumb, but that's a massive improvement from just floating around through your day with shit happening to you all the time and never having a grasp of your emotions, never knowing what's going on, and never getting those moments to be, like you said, just present in the moment, doing what you're doing, being on the podcast, having this conversation, not worrying about what the meeting at 3 is like or what tomorrow is going to bring, because you hit the nail on the head. It's not in your fucking control.
Right. So. Well, and I love how you said, like, when shit happens to you, because that's a total victim statement, right? And that's giving away your power. You're then not in control of your life. You're saying, well, everything's happening to me. So how can you flip the switch on that and be in control? No, not everything's happening to you. You can take control. This is your life. How are you going to pivot? Okay, I wanted to go for a run this morning. It's raining. You can either sit there like, why is this happening to me? Or you can run in the rain, run on the treadmill, or choose a different workout.
Right. Yeah, it's all choices. Everything comes down to choices. But it's hard to identify those choices if you don't have the awareness to see them in the first place. Right. And because you're clouded by the frustration and the anxiety of not being able to run outside. And for a lot of people, whether it's running or having a child, it's those moments are overwhelming, right? So all I can think about
Oh,
is that I can't run outside. My life is over because my one habit that I'm trying to work on isn't available for me today. Whereas someone like yourself can come along and say, "Hey, you can run on the treadmill, you can run in the rain." They're like, "Oh, I didn't know that was an option."
right. But I think when you're in that victim mentality, which like I was for so long, then it's another thing. Why is this happening to me? When you're angry and everything's, happening to you. Again, no, you got to flip the switch. You can be in control. And it's just about being able to tolerate things, pivot, think differently, and adapt.
When you got into like running and triathlons, then Ironmans, which are insane, and then more marathons, was do you feel part of that was from it was like an escape from the rest of your life, or was it just a true genuine interest in endurance sports?
When I started, for me, it was a total numbing thing. So I was really trying to quit substances. So basically, I traded one numbing device for another. I really wanted to give up alcohol. I wanted to give up smoking. And so I threw myself into triathlons, and then I became addicted to that, and it was crazy. I'd go to bed at 9 and get up at 4, and I was obsessed with training, and it was super helpful. Like I needed it. It kicked my ass, and it helped me give those up. And it got me through a period of time. Then once I was through that, about a year in, I realized, okay, I just traded one addiction for the other. And just because this is maybe a better coping mechanism, I'm still numbing myself. So then I really did the work, dialed back, and started to really work to have to sit with and be with my feelings, even though they were so uncomfortable, and learn how to be alone, learn how to feel everything. And now, again, that was quite a long time ago. I do them for the mental and the physical. I love a marathon training cycle, love, hate. I have a week and a half left of this one. But, because it's total mind over matter. I find marathon training the hardest of anything.
More
But for
so
me,
than Ironman.
oh God, yeah, for sure.
Wow.
Because you're just running every day. There's no break. There's no cross training. Right. You're out there. I train now with a team, with a coach. The accountability in the community for me has been huge. But this kicks my ass, man. And every day we're out there. No excuses, getting up early every day, running 6 days a week.
I remember in when we were in Costa Rica, okay, I'm going to butcher exactly how this went down so you can help me fill in, but we would go on these like little runs. This, by the way, was when I started running. I'll run like once a week now, but just for cross training. But it all started on that trip because I would have to lead these beach runs in the morning. And that's when I found out that you did like marathons, because the first time that we went on the run, we turned around and you just kept going. And I was like, what a sick person. Like she's just running because she likes it. That's so messed up. But then you came back. And then I think it was like the next night you just went for a run at like, I don't know, like 5 or 6. It was like evening, and we thought you got lost.
I
Do you
didn't know
remember
that
that?
was yes.
And
That
you
was
had no phone, and you got to ride back on some guy's 4-wheeler or something. Like, oh my God, it was like full panic.
That was the first day. No, that was the first day. And, like I traveled far. I needed to get a run in, and it was night in Costa Rica. Yeah, my phone wasn't working. I didn't speak Spanish. I was like, oh God, I'm not going home from this trip. This is horrible.
It was like it got when you got back, and we're like, oh, good, you're back. What happened? And then we felt worse about what happened because you were like out on your own. You had no phone. You got a ride. Didn't you get a ride back on a 4-wheeler from some random person in the Sahara?
Well, initially I got a ride on a 4-wheeler. Then I found out she was going to meet her drug dealer. So right. I got off said 4-wheeler.
Like, sorry, I'm sober. Not doing that.
And then was crying and found some nice like mom and who took me home in her truck. But yeah,
my
no,
God.
that was when I realized like, no, I have something to live for. I have a daughter at home. I need
Right.
to get home. This cannot be the end of me. I cannot disappear on this trip.
That was a pivotal moment in your
Yes, like
career.
I love myself. I care.
Yeah.
I don't want this to be the end.
That is that trip was just wild, but it's crazy. Like I did this run. The longest I've ever ran is like 15.2 miles. I did it during the pandemic.
Nice.
I do not know what's wrong with you for wanting to run 26.2 miles all the time annually. Like it's crazy. The running is still, it's the one thing where I'm like, I'm starting to appreciate a little bit. We talked about in Costa Rica, like runner's high and just the whatever people are connecting with about running. I still don't fully get it, but I'm actively trying to like better understand it. But it
Trying to
is mind blowing to me that you've done these Ironmans and you continue to go and do. What marathon are you doing coming up?
New York City.
And you do that every year, right?
Well, it was
Or
canceled last year. So,
right.
but I'll tell you, I mean, and this even ties back though to fertility, right? And what I see with patients. So I'm someone who, I've been an athlete my whole life. And, I got into endurance athletics, like I said, like 5 years ago. But it's this total mind over matter thing and this challenge. And so then, and I see a lot of my patients who are athletes going through fertility. It's so challenging. That was one of the hardest things for me, having this exercise be curtailed. I didn't know what to do with myself. Like, what do I do with all those emotions? I mean, for me, it's moving meditation. I cannot be centered without starting my day with it. It's how I stay mindful. It's how I stay sober. It's how I can be my best self to everybody around me. And the community in New York City, it can be extremely hard to find community. And so I'm so grateful that I have this team and this coach, someone checking on me every day who really cares. People, we're all like-minded. And, certainly when you get into endurance sports, you find a lot of people out there who are sober, who are dealing with their own demons or battles. They're out there for a reason. And so it's great to find like-minded people who just get it, and you don't have to explain yourself, no judgment, you're just out there. So I'm really, really grateful for that.
It is a very common thing, is the transition from addiction to sobriety to fitness, and finding the same commitment, like the same commitment that was negatively affecting your life to now positively affecting your life in your commitment to sport or whatever it may be.
Mm.
Do you think
that so much of sobriety though is about like ego and fear and humbling yourself. And so I feel like that's also what these athletic endeavors do. Like they humble you, they take you down. Like they don't care, they don't take prisoners.
So you're saying that elements of what make being sober a challenge, like dealing with your own ego or limitations, the physical challenges those same things, but in a different way.
Yeah, I mean, what usually holds back humans in life, like sobriety aside, I mean, fear and ego, right?
Right.
Those
Negative self-beliefs.
Right. So that's what usually holds humans back from achieving goals, whether it's personally, professionally, fear and ego. For myself, I learned about that specifically in AA and doing the work of the program. But I think endurance athletics is so much about like check your ego at the door, work through fear. You think you can't do something, like I bet you didn't think you could run 15 miles. You did. It's working through
100%.
fear.
Yes.
And so it's this total mental challenge. And then I think that translates, into other aspects of your life to help you improve, whether it's, working through a relationship or trying to get a promotion at work, having a conversation you don't want to. So I think it's beneficial kind of all around.
Do you feel like that is a staple in your sobriety now, is physical exercise?
Oh, 110%. It's a non-negotiable for me.
So, I mean, I guess this is more like a fear related question, but if something were to happen to where you couldn't exercise at your capacity, or I think to like the infertility treatment, right? There's certain prescriptions where you can't
Mhm.
exercise beyond a certain limit. So I would imagine that there's plenty of people that are sober from substance abuse and going through fertility treatment.
Sure.
How do you coach someone through that? Like, hey, you cannot do the glue that's holding you together. Biologically, it's not good for you to do that during this phase. How do you keep them level through that?
So I love that question. You're speaking my biggest fear into the universe, right? But I mean, during the pandemic, though, it happened to me. I had a lot of long haul symptoms from COVID, and I couldn't exercise. I was so tired. I had chronic fatigue. Personally, I feel really blessed to be where I'm at in my sobriety, and I feel really strong in it. I have amazing supports. I have all the tools. I have amazing people in my life. So I know that I'd be able to cope with it. And so I think when working with people in fertility treatment, again, it's helping them figure out different behaviors and different patterns of behavior. So, okay, no, right now you can't go out there and, run every day and pound the pavement. Okay, here's what you can do. You can walk as much as you want. Okay, let's figure out what you can do on this walk. How can we give you other challenges? What are other things you can work on right now? And it's also really important, I think, for people to remember this is situational. So I always like this comes up a lot in my work with people, to do this exercise of who you were before, who you are now, and who you want to be. So,
like a thought exercise.
Yeah. So a lot of people think that when they're going through fertility treatment, they have to be the same person they were before, operating at 110%, giving everything at work, at home, okay, no, you don't. Again, and I use the example of cancer again, because same stress levels. If someone were going through chemotherapy, right, or radiation, whatever, cancer treatment, you wouldn't expect them to be the same person. You'd say, how can I help you? But unfortunately with infertility, our society just doesn't have the same level of recognition to what that means to someone. So the first thing I teach someone is grace, right? And giving themselves grace, then figuring out, okay, this is right now, we're going to work in the micro. We're not going to think long-term. We're not going to think are you going to run next year's marathon, next year's Ironman, whatever. What are we going to do right now? How can we get you through this? Okay, let's come up with sort of a walking plan. Walking's always okay. What are other things you can do to fill your time, right? If you've allotted, 60, 90 minutes a day to exercise, how can we fill that time for you? What can we do in this time period? And again, we're just going to work through one cycle at a time, these finite, smaller periods of time, because that's a lot more manageable than thinking big picture.
I totally connect with that. I mean, that's habit coaching 101, is just to break things down to smaller, more manageable pieces and talk about how you can enable someone, not how you can disable them. So if someone wants to lose weight, you don't want to focus on all the foods they can't eat, because it's then every single movement, every single choice seems like a limitation and like they're losing something that they identify with. But instead you focus about the things that you can do. So what can you have? What can you eat at this restaurant? What restaurants can you go to on the way home that you like that kind of mental shift. And I love that point about the 3 versions of yourself. I think that's a really interesting way to look at it, because it allows you the freedom to know that the person that you're in, or that state that you're in right now, that's not the permanent state. You're going through something that's really high stress. You need all hands on deck to get through this process. This isn't going to be your top finishing Ironman version of you, but also that's okay. And it's okay to not be operating at 110% 24/7 in a society that really drives home that that's the only acceptable way to be.
Absolutely. And I mean, I think in a way the pandemic was almost good for that, especially in New York City, where a culture of just, it's like, if you're not working, what are you doing? Right. Which is a horrible mentality. That's horrible. We are entitled to not work sometimes, and it doesn't mean we're not hard workers. But I think the pandemic and working from home, at least allots people the opportunity to have a little bit more grace, have a little bit more freedom. So, I think a lot of my patients appreciated that. They didn't have to It's a little bit easier to sneak out of work for a doctor's appointment if you're working from home versus leaving your office. But sure, I think always constantly thinking about sort of with any phase in life, like, who are you now? Because you're not who you were before. And that's the beauty of being a human, is that we have the power to always change and evolve, which, change and evolvement, evolution usually happens from the bad times, not the good. So,
Totally.
yeah,
I mean, think about training, right? Like, why do you go on crazy? Why is training for a marathon the worst? It's because you're putting your body through all this stress so that it adapts, so that when you go and run a marathon, you don't implode or like go down with a torn hamstring. It's you're conditioning your body through stress factors to then be able to accomplish this thing. Stress and fear are essential elements to growth.
right.
And being in those states, not constantly, you don't want to be scared 24/7 and full of anxiety, but they're essential experiences to then shape who you are to come out of it on the other side, someone who can impact other women's lives that are going through this kind of thing, someone who's gotten through their sobriety and is on the other side and can look back and reflect on it and share those experiences with people. Those don't happen if those parts aren't so challenging.
Right. And I think, something can break you or make you. And, I was certainly broken for a really long time before I started to piece myself back together. But I wouldn't change anything, and who I am today has everything to do with going through infertility, going through divorce, all these challenges. And I think it's led me to be a much more empathic, compassionate, mindful person, and hopefully better to all of those around me. My ego, my fear, everything was just holding me back before, my anger. That doesn't serve you. And so I'm so grateful that I had these experience, to pick myself up and be better and evolve.
It's special to be able to let that stuff go.
Oh
But
God,
it's
yeah.
really hard to do it until you do it.
So hard. And it's constant work. It's a daily challenge. You have to always be thinking about it. And it's not always easy.
But that's an important thing too, is that work is not, I feel like in a society chock full of instant gratification and being bombarded with like end results all the time, you're always just seeing other people's end results. You're never seeing their hard work. That's what social media is in a nutshell, right? It's just people showing you the best version of themselves or the best accomplishment, and it's nonstop. Like, it's not how fucking the world is. It's the opposite. It's way more hard work. It's years and years and years and years and years of failing auditions before you get a role. It's not constant just getting roles. And it's important to remember that, like, through whatever process you're going through, there's the point at which you accomplish the thing, but then you have to maintain what got you there. And that's the part that people don't talk about. It's the after the accomplishment. And if you lose those principles, if you lose that mindset, everything will crumble, no matter what it is.
Oh, 100%. I think, it's so interesting. I never share any of this stuff really with anyone. So it's so interesting. I don't know if anyone listening, what they'll think, but, sometimes I hear like what people think of me, and I kind of just want to be like, yo, do you have any, like, I used to be so broke that I would take my daughter out for ramen, and I would only get for her because I couldn't afford for myself. I was like broke as shit. Financial insecurity is debilitating. Then my apartment flooded. I lost everything, no insurance, had to move in with my parents for 4 months. My life was a freaking disaster. And, like, I'm pretty open about stuff, not usually about this, but man, and that was only 5 years ago. So I like nothing, that trip to Costa Rica, I told you guys, like, that was the first trip I had been on in literally 3 years, because between the combo of being broke, going through fertility treatments, and having a baby, where was I going? Like, down the block and back.
Yeah. No, I remember that. I do remember specifically, like, I think everyone arrived on that trip for different reasons, some more serious than others, but I remember that trip was just so important to you because it was the first time that you had been able to, or, allowed yourself to take any kind of time for you after getting through the hectic chaos that was everything that you just listed.
And you know what? I was thinking about this the other day. I remember I cried on the way home in the van. I was crying because that trip was amazing. And, it was sort of this like the universe like threw together this amazing group of people. Like we were all working through something. We were all kind of there for a reason. And it was this magical group. And I was crying on the way back because I didn't want to return to my life because I was so unhappy in it. And I was reflecting about that recently on the way back from a trip. And I was like, God, I'm so grateful because I love my life. And like the trip was great, but I'm so happy to be going home because I love where I'm at. And like, what a difference from whenever that was 2-3 years ago, that I can be grateful and happy in my life. And so I just took a moment to really reflect on that.
That's awesome. It was that trip was really, it was such an interesting group of
Oh,
people. I
right.
loved it. You never know what to expect especially when it's work related, right? Because like I'm showing up because it's my job, not because I'm going on the trip for a reason. So like even from each of us coming there to lead the trip and make sure that everything was going to go the way it went, but then to individually meet each person and go, wow, we have like a very unique group of people here from, I mean, one, all over the world, but two, at just completely different stages in life. And yet, and I think this is why retreats and trips like this are so special, is because like you really do, you just come as you. Like you're not there you're not trying to impress anyone, and no one really knows anything about you. So they only get to know what you're willing to share. And so it's a nice departure from whatever stuff is going on, because you don't bring any of that with you. And so it just creates this really fun environment where like 12 people that didn't know each other all come and have like a really good, carefree, awesome experience. It was really cool.
Yeah, it was the best. Yeah. And like you said, you can be kind of anyone you want.
So what's next for the world of fertility?
The world of fertility. Well, so many things. I mean, I think on a macro level, really working to change the healthcare system, working to improve coverage, working to improve also employee benefits in the workspace and have employers have a better understanding of what employees going through treatment need and what they're going through, so that people, people get so stressed all the time. They don't want to disclose because they don't want their employer to know they're trying to conceive, because then they fear, they'll be discriminated against, passed over for a promotion,
Right.
because their employer will think, okay, well, that person's like out of the workforce. And people, it's really stressful to juggle the appointments, the stress, the physical, the emotional. So really working to make changes in the workplace to help employees feel supported, and not deal with work stress on top of everything else. So that's a macro goal that I'm working really hard on. And then, working to keep changing the dialogue. 20 years ago, cancer was like the C word. It was whispered, no one talked about it. There was a stigma. And I feel, that's kind of where fertility is at now with this stigma. It's whispered about, there's not as much known about it. So really working to keep raising our voices to help people understand, and then help people be able to advocate for themselves and have the knowledge to go get checked, go get a consult. Maybe you're not ready to have a kid right now, but just go get a workup so okay, are there any red flags? Is anything coming up that I should know about? Because that might affect, again, my timeline, my treatment plan, so that your world kind of doesn't come crashing down on you when you are ready to conceive.
With that, I would imagine, just kind of thinking about it out loud, there's got to be anxiety that builds up just with the thought of going to get an appointment to see if you're in a position where you can have a child. So
Oh,
like, what do you say to people that are, because I would seemingly agree with you. Like it's almost like every one of us should be going out there and making appointments with doctors to find out where we're at, so that if in the event that we can catch something early, we catch it and then we can handle it. Or in the event that we're needing to do some kind of treatment in anticipation of trying to conceive, then we should be doing that also. So I would guess that there's going to be people that hear that and want to do it, and then the anxiety builds up, and then they don't.
Sure. I mean, look, healthcare is really scary, right? Definitely can be. But it's as simple, for men, there's something called track fertility, TRAK. You can buy it on Amazon. And you can just do an at-home test for your sperm. Check it out. Although I just told someone about that and they told me it's sold out. Hopefully it'll be restocked soon. But you can do an at-home test, or go just do a semen analysis. For women, you can either ask your gynecologist to just do some simple blood work, or better yet, I would definitely recommend do a consult with a reproductive endocrinologist. They'll do some blood work to check your hormone levels. They'll probably do a vaginal ultrasound to check your follicle counts, which kind of will give you an idea of the number of eggs you have and how everything's looking. Do that because it's going to be cheaper and much more minimally invasive than waiting and then finding out you need a ton of treatment that maybe you don't have insurance coverage for.
I was reading on the RMA website that I was just reading about fertility in general, and I was surprised to find out, and again, this is like me being a dumb, ignorant dude, that it was something like 8% of cases are actually because they're isolated because of the male.
Sure.
So it's my whole life,
yeah,
I just think I'm like, oh, infertility is because the girl can't get pregnant. How ignorant is that, when in reality, even in all the studies they've done, 8% of these cases, it's actually because the guy can't produce offspring.
Yeah, it's usually 1/3 female, 1/3 male, and then 1/3 unexplained.
So dudes, go out there and find out if you can have kids. It might be your fault.
No. Well, okay, so it's no one's fault. Remember, it's a disease. Right. So that, and that definitely comes up. So I just have to correct you, because people say like, oh, it's my fault, or it's her fault, or it's his fault. It's nobody's fault. No one chooses this. Definitely not a choice to need assistance.
Actually, I'm glad I said that, because it's interesting when you try to change, like you said, you want to change the narrative around this. It's weird how things like that they're like innate response, right? I just said that, not with malintent, but that's how I said it, right? Because that's the way that we do think about these things. Right. It's a guilt thing. It's my fault because we didn't have a kid. It's your fault because you didn't get pregnant. But what you're saying is that's not what's going on. Sometimes it just is that way. It's a disease, and we need to treat it just like if someone told you that they were struggling with alcohol, you wouldn't go, well, that's your fault. You would want to help them.
Right, I would hope. Or, I guess probably another parallel, if someone tells you they have cancer, you're not going to say that's your fault. How can I help you? Exactly. And so, can you imagine how that plays in a partnership? If it's a male factor, and then someone's placing blame on the other person. I mean, very difficult to navigate.
Well, Rena, I want to be respectful of your time, one. So last couple minutes here, shameless plug, like let people know where they can find you, how they can listen to you. You have a podcast as well, so you should mention that. And then also maybe some places where people can find resources for this type of thing if they're struggling to come up with a solution, or if they're curious about getting analyzed or figuring out what their best options are.
Sure. Yes, I have a podcast called Fertility Forward. You can find it anywhere podcasts are, and we cover kind of all things fertility. So that's a great resource for sort of learning about the space. And then my Instagram is at Rena MG Fertility. You can DM me there if you have questions. There's resources on that page too. My website is renamgfertility.com. Resolve, I mentioned, is the National Infertility Organization. Ton of info about insurance, support groups, everything over there. But yeah, head over to my channels. I post a lot about resources and coping mechanisms. The clinic I work at in New York, RMA of New York, is fantastic. If you're New York based and looking for a clinic, but feel free to message me or shoot me an email if you have questions.
Awesome. Well, Rena, thank you so much for your time. It was really interesting for me. I appreciate being able to learn from you. I'm sure that we'll do this again in the future, because there's so many things that we didn't unpack So I'm excited to return back to that as well.
Likewise, thanks so much for having me, and it was so good to see you.
Of course.